The scent of my perfect life was suddenly suffocated by sweat and metallic dread. I had 3 hours to escape, but my wife just texted, "I'm coming home early." The scent of polished mahogany and stale scotch usually brought me a strange sense of comfort. The smell of my success, the scent of my perfect life. But tonight, the air in my home office was thick with something else. Nervous sweat and the metallic tang of impending disaster. I stared at the 2 carefully placed envelopes on my antique desk. One was a hefty insurance payout check, neatly folded. The other, a plane ticket to Buenos Aires, booked under a pseudonym. Both were keys to my future. It was Tuesday. Sarah, my wife of 15 years, was at her weekly book club, meaning I had precisely 3 hours of uninterrupted solitude to finalize the exit strategy. 15 years. 15 years of polite dinners, shared bank accounts, and a bed that felt more like a strategic treaty zone than a place of intimacy. 15 years spent building a life I no longer wanted, all for the ghost of stability I thought I needed. Then there was Elena. Elena, with her sharp wit, her infectious laugh that sounded like wind chimes, and her complete terrifying refusal to live a half-life. She worked in my firm's satellite marketing division, a fact I managed to keep hidden with the precision of a master wafecracker. We met in secret, hidden corners of downtown restaurants, rushed phone calls in the sterile quiet of airport lounges, while supposedly on business trips. Elena didn't just want a piece of my life. She wanted all of it. She wanted the chaos, the risk, the grand sweeping gesture of my departure. The plan was flawless, or so I thought. Sarah would wake up tomorrow to find me gone, a brief, regretful note explaining that I needed space to find myself. The note was carefully crafted to sound vaguely spiritual and utterly impersonal. The insurance money, a nice lump sum from a minor, years-old policy payout I'd forgotten about until I was deep into my escape planning, would be my buffer. Enough to live comfortably for 6 months while I sorted out the messy international relocation. The ticket to South America was the first leg of my true journey with Elena. I picked up the plane ticket. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. flight to Miami, connecting to Buenos Aires. A new name, a new accent, a new life where my tailored suits were replaced by linen shirts and my responsibilities by passion. I felt a surge of adrenaline so intense it was almost painful. Freedom was intoxicating. I tucked the ticket into my inside jacket pocket, the very jacket I planned to wear through the security line tomorrow morning. I moved to the desk drawer where I kept the emergency cash, peeling off the $50 bills and stuffing them into a slim leather wallet. My escape fund. Everything was accounted for. Passport, burner phone, enough local currency to get me through the first 48 hours outside the country. I closed the drawer with a soft click. Just as I turned back toward the main door, ready to enjoy one last quiet evening pretending to be the devoted husband I wasn't, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Sarah. Odd, she usually didn't text until she was leaving the book club, around 9:30 p.m. It was only 7:15 p.m. I hesitated, my heart giving a nervous stutter. I shouldn't check it. Any communication now could derail the delicate balance of my evening. But the instinct to check, the ingrained need to account for her movements, was too strong. I picked up the device, the screen illuminating my tense reflection. The message was short, uncharacteristic, and delivered via the shared family messaging app. It read, "Darling, something important came up. Don't wait up. I'm coming home early." My breath hitched, catching painfully in my throat. Coming home early. The words didn't just contradict the established timeline, They shattered the protective bubble I had so meticulously constructed around the next 12 hours. My carefully choreographed silence, the 3 hours I needed to slip away unnoticed like a phantom, was collapsing into minutes. I slapped the phone face down onto the desk, the hard plastic hitting the wood with a muffled thud that sounded deafening in the suddenly silent room. Panic, cold and immediate, flooded my system, overriding the euphoria of the planned escape. Sarah was notoriously punctual. Book club ended precisely at 9:30 p.m., giving me ample time to be gone before she was even thinking about a nightcap. For her to be home at 7:30 p.m. meant one of two things. Either the book club dissolved early due to some minor domestic emergency, or, and this possibility made my blood run glacial, she knew. I snatched the phone back up, my thumb hovering over the text message thread, desperately scanning for context. There was nothing more. No follow-up emoji, no explanation. Just that stark, ominous declaration. I looked wildly around the office. The escape kit was still spread across the desk. The gleaming plane ticket, the thick stacks of cash, the burner phone tucked innocently beneath a stack of quarterly reports. If Sarah walked in now, she wouldn't need a detective. I was presenting her with an open and shut case, Exhibit A through Z, neatly arranged under the glow of my Tiffany lamp. I lunged for the desk, sweeping the damning evidence into the drawer. The insurance check, which I'd intended to leave in the note as a final, pathetic olive branch, I shoved haphazardly behind the heavy ledger. The plane ticket, the bright blue border a beacon of my betrayal, I managed to cram into the inner lining of my jacket pocket, the stiff paper crinkling against my ribs. The cash followed, stuffed into my trouser pockets, making them bulge unnaturally. I slammed the drawer shut, the sound far louder than I intended. I stood there, frozen, listening to the house. Silence. But it was the loaded silence of an empty theater just before the curtain rises. I held my breath, straining to hear the crunch of gravel in the driveway, the distinctive sound of her heavy sedan pulling into the garage. Nothing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe her friend got sick. Maybe they just ran out of wine. I needed to appear normal, utterly, boringly normal. I needed to look like the man who had spent his evening reviewing tax codes, not the man preparing to commit grand larceny against his marriage vows. I forced myself to take several deep, slow breaths, mimicking the meditative exercises Elena had insisted I try. Control the narrative, Mark. Control the narrative. I smoothed down my shirt, straightened my tie, and tried to wipe the sheen of terror from my face in the reflection of the dark monitor screen. I decided I had to check the hallway just to confirm her car wasn't there yet. I slipped out of the office, pulling the door almost closed behind me, leaving it ajar just enough to hear if the front door opened. The house was dark downstairs, lit only by the ambient glow filtering in from the streetlights. I padded silently across the Persian rug in the hallway, moving toward the expansive living room window that overlooked the circular drive. I peered out through the sheer curtains, my heart hammering against the stolen cash in my pocket. The driveway was empty. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. I must have overreacted. It was just an early finish. I chuckled weakly to myself, the sound hollow and pathetic. Time to put on some low-key jazz, grab a glass of water, and pretend to read the morning briefing notes until the coast was clear for my 6 a.m. departure. I turned away from the window, ready to retreat to the safe zone of my office, when I saw it. Lying on the polished marble of the entryway table, right next to the antique silver bowl where Sarah always left her keys, was a small, brightly colored object. It wasn't hers. It was a tourist keychain, shaped like a miniature tango dancer, the kind you'd buy at an airport gift shop. And beneath it, placed with surgical precision, was a single pristine white business card. I knew that card instantly. It was Elena's marketing firm contact card. I snatched it up, my fingers trembling so violently I nearly tore the thick stock paper. On the back, scrawled in thick black ink that definitely wasn't Elena's delicate script, were 3 words written underneath my name. "We need to talk." The air was instantly sucked out of the foyer. My vision tunneled, focusing only on those 3 accusatory words scrawled across Elena's professional calling card. "We need to talk." The message wasn't from Sarah, which was a momentary relief, but the implication was far more terrifying. Someone new, someone who clearly had access to Elena's personal effects, or worse, had seen her recently enough to acquire her card, and they knew about us. The tango dancer keychain. It was the cheap souvenir Elena had bought during our disastrously brief layover in Sao Paulo last fall, the one I had joked about throwing away because it was so tacky. She kept it on her desk at the satellite office, a silly little talisman of our stolen moments. How did it end up here, on the marble altar of my stable, unsuspecting marriage? I whirled around, my gaze darting from the front door, which was still locked, to the darkened archway leading into the living room. The silence of the house pressed in, thick and suffocating. Sarah wasn't home yet, but someone had been here. Someone had entered, left this calling card, and departed, all within the narrow window I thought I had secured. My mind raced through possibilities, discarding them with frantic speed. A cleaner? No, they wouldn't tamper with my personal effects. A delivery person? They wouldn't leave a note like this. This was targeted, precise, and intimate. My first primal instinct screamed Elena. Had she panicked? Had she tried to tell me something important? A change in our plan? A leak? And instead of calling, she sent an operative? But the handwriting wasn't hers. It was strong, angular, almost aggressively masculine. I shoved the card and the keychain deep into my pocket alongside the cash and the ticket. I had to get back to the office, secure everything, and call Elena on the burner phone. If this was a setup, I needed to know who was playing the game. As I took my first tentative step back toward the safety of my study, a sound sliced through the stillness. It wasn't the heavy tread of Sarah's expensive heels. It was a slight, almost imperceptible creak, the sound of the 3rd stair tread from the top, the one only our housekeeper ever complained about. My blood turned to ice water. The stairs. I froze mid-stride, pivoting toward the grand staircase that dominated the center of the hall. It was pitch black up there, a yawning chasm of shadow leading to our bedroom and the guest rooms. If someone was upstairs, they weren't waiting for Sarah to get home. They were waiting for me. I felt the adrenaline spike again, but this time it wasn't excitement. It was pure, unadulterated terror. I hadn't heard the front door open or close. If they came in, they were still inside. I was trapped between a massive, unlocked front door and a shadow waiting above me. My hand instinctively fumbled for the heavy brass letter opener I usually kept on the entryway console, a dull, decorative piece, but heavy enough to use as a weapon. My fingers closed around the cool metal just as a low, measured voice drifted down from the darkness above. "Going somewhere, Mark." The voice was deep, calm, and utterly unfamiliar. It wasn't Sarah's familiar, slightly strained soprano, nor was it the smooth, confident tone of any of my business associates. This voice carried the flat, uncompromising tone of finality. And then a sliver of light appeared at the top of the staircase. Not from a lamp being turned on, but from the muzzle flash of a small, dark object being aimed directly down at me. The muzzle flash was a brief, blinding spark against the absolute black of the upper landing, but it was enough. In that microsecond of illumination, I saw the silhouette of the man holding the weapon. He was tall, broader than me, and absolutely motionless, perched at the top step like a gargoyle about to strike. "Don't move," the voice repeated, devoid of any inflection that might suggest anger or negotiation. It was a statement of fact, like declaring the weather. My knuckles were white around the useless brass letter opener. Every survival instinct I had, honed over years of corporate warfare but never truly tested by physical threat, screamed at me to run, to duck, to fight. But the gun was steady, and the man's posture radiated a lethal competence that made fighting seem like a particularly swift form of suicide. "Who are you?" I managed to croak out, the sound thin and pathetic in the cavernous hall. My eyes were still struggling to adjust, trying to memorize the shape of my executioner. "That's irrelevant right now," the man said. "What is relevant is what you've got in your pockets, Mark." He knew my name. He knew I was planning to leave. He knew about the escape fund, or at least suspected I had something of value. The tango dancer keychain, Elena's card, it all pointed to this moment, a confrontation orchestrated by someone who had clearly been monitoring both my mistress and, apparently, my marriage. My mind flashed back to the insurance check in the drawer, the one I hadn't managed to grab. If this man was interested in my liquidity, maybe he hadn't found everything. But the plane ticket and the cash were right against my hip and leg. If he made me empty my pockets here, in the middle of the foyer, I was utterly exposed. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, the words tasting like ash. I slowly lowered the letter opener, placing it gently on the marble floor. It made a tiny ringing clink that seemed enormous in the silence. "Don't insult my intelligence," the man drawled. "You've been sloppy lately, Mark. Elena was a beautiful mistake, but mistakes have consequences, and messy departures require careful oversight." Elena. He was connected to Elena. Was this a rival firm? A scorned ex-lover of hers who had decided to enact revenge on the man stealing her away? Or perhaps most chillingly, was this a consequence orchestrated by someone protecting Sarah? The thought brought a surge of bitter irony. Sarah, the woman I dismissed as predictable, might have hired muscle to ensure I didn't get away clean. "I can give you money," I ventured, deciding negotiation was the only path. "There's more in the office drawer, a lot more. We can avoid all this mess." The man chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You think this is about money, Mark? You think I'm a common thief? You ruined a life, you broke sacred vows, and you thought you could simply buy a ticket to forget it all? No, this isn't about liquidation. This is about redistribution." He started descending the stairs, one slow, deliberate step at a time. He wasn't rushing. He was enjoying the process, the slow tightening of the noose. As he reached the second-to-last step, the beam of light from his weapon steadied, illuminating the floor right at my feet. "Now," he said, his shadow stretching monstrously over me, "empty the pockets slowly. Show me the passport." I knew I couldn't comply. Surrendering the passport meant the end of the Buenos Aires fantasy. It meant being trapped here, begging for my life, probably ending up in that very drawer behind the ledger. As his foot touched the marble floor, signaling the end of his descent, I saw my chance. The open office door just 10 feet to my left, a dark, enclosed space. If I could dive inside, I might be able to grab something, anything, to level the playing field before he could bring that gun to bear in the confined space. It was a desperate gamble, a 1 in a million shot. I didn't wait for him to finish his command. I exploded forward, not toward the office, but angling slightly to the right, aiming to use the massive antique grandfather clock in the corner as momentary cover, hoping the unexpected movement would buy me the half-second needed to pivot toward the door. But the man holding the gun was faster, or perhaps just better prepared for precisely this eventuality. Before my feet had even left the ground in my desperate lunge, I heard a different sound entirely. A sharp, heavy thump from the front door, as if someone had just slammed a thick shoulder into the solid oak. The door, which I had sworn was locked, shuddered violently in its frame. The gunman upstairs faltered, his attention torn between the man charging the entrance and the terrified fugitive scrambling toward the office. He hesitated, momentarily breaking his focus on me, and in that instant of distraction I heard a second sound, a sudden furious yell that was unmistakably Sarah's voice, laced with a primal rage I had never, in 15 years, believed her capable of producing. "Get away from him!" The cacophony that erupted in the foyer was a violent symphony of chaos. Sarah's guttural scream, a sound that belonged on a battlefield, not in our quiet, beige suburban home, collided with the renewed menacing silence of the gunman upstairs. My desperate scramble toward the office stalled as the focus of the entire confrontation snapped instantly to the newly arrived threat at the front door. "Sarah, no!" the gunman roared from the landing, the calm professionalism in his voice finally breaking into raw panic. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't a hired enforcer for Sarah. He was an operative sent for me, and Sarah had walked right into the ambush, or worse, she had anticipated it and set her own trap. The betrayal, the years of polite compliance, had apparently been a smokescreen for a will of iron. I didn't need to see the fight happening at the door. I heard it. The sickening, wet crack of a heavy blow connecting, followed by a muffled grunt, and then the heavy, unmistakable sound of a body collapsing onto the marble floor. The letter opener, my failed weapon, was forgotten. The only thing that mattered was escaping the crossfire between my past and my future. I pivoted hard toward the office doorway, ignoring the gunfight, ignoring the sudden, horrible silence from the landing. I burst into the room, my lungs burning, and slammed the heavy wooden door shut, twisting the lock with frantic energy. The deadbolt clicked home with a reassuring, temporary finality. I scrambled to the desk, ignoring the bulging pockets. The burner phone. That was my lifeline. I snatched it up, my fingers flying across the screen to dial Elena's pre-programmed emergency number. It rang twice, an eternity, before she snatched it up. "Mark, what is happening? My phone is blowing up. I'm getting alerts." Elena's voice was frantic, sharp with alarm. "He's here, Elena. A guy, armed, upstairs. He knows everything. Did you tell anyone about the plan? Did you give that card to someone?" I hissed, my voice barely audible over the ragged sound of my own breathing. There was a pause on Elena's end, a moment of absolute stillness that felt heavier than the violence raging 20 feet away in my hallway. "No, Mark, listen to me. I didn't tell anyone about the card, but the man you described, tall, broad shoulders." Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "That's him. That's Anthony. He was my fiancé. He found out about us last week. He threatened me. I thought he'd just come after me." Anthony. Not a corporate rival, not Sarah's hired gun. A jealous, dangerous man who tracked his lost love and followed the trail straight to her lover's house. "Where is he now?" I demanded, gripping the desk edge until my knuckles were white. "He left my apartment this morning. He said he was going to deliver a final message to the man who stole his future." Elena choked out. "Mark, he's highly trained. He was military intelligence. You can't fight him. Get out of the house. Now." I looked at the door, remembering the heavy impact that silenced Sarah. Anthony had been distracted for a second by her unexpected interference. If Sarah had tried to stop him, she was now out of the equation. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My wife, the woman I had planned to leave, broken-hearted and financially compromised, had just thrown herself between a trained killer and me. The silence from the hallway was now absolute, more terrifying than the earlier sounds of struggle. Anthony was either subdued or he had moved on. "Mark, are you there? You need to get to the back," Elena screamed. Before I could answer, the heavy wood of the office door bowed inward as something massive hit it, not with a deliberate knock, but with brutal, focused force. The lock screamed in protest, splinters flying past my head. I didn't think. I acted. I grabbed the first heavy object in reach, a ceramic bust of Cicero that had sat on my shelf for 10 years, and hurled it uselessly at the buckling door just as the lock mechanism gave way with a sharp crack. The door flew open. Anthony stood framed in the doorway, breathing heavily, his face grim and set. The gun was still steady in his hand, but his eyes flickered past me, toward the heavy, reinforced window overlooking the manicured back garden. He was still prioritizing the capture, not the kill, perhaps because he hadn't yet processed Sarah's intervention. But my eyes locked onto something else. Slumped against the wall just inside the doorframe, hidden by Anthony's bulk until now, was Sarah. She wasn't standing. She was leaning heavily, gripping her left arm, her face pale and slick with sweat. But her right hand, the one that had managed to grab the heavy ornamental umbrella stand from the hall, was still curled tight around the brass handle, and she was looking directly at me. Not with fear, but with an unnerving, focused rage. "The garden, Mark," she whispered, her voice faint but clear, a ghost of her normal self. "Go, now." Anthony turned his head fractionally, confused by the sound of her voice coming from behind him, but he was too late. Sarah, bleeding and wounded, provided the final necessary distraction. With a sound that tore from my chest, like a broken animal cry, I vaulted over the desk, smashed the glass of the French doors leading to the patio with my elbow, and dove headlong into the cool night air, the sound of a single echoing gunshot erupting from the office behind me.